also having local people who understand the importance of doing their share of local investment to make it happen is also critical. So, when folks say, you never do anything that matters to me in Albany, if you're happy about these film crews coming to town, leaving their money here, giving people temporary jobs, having the fun of seeing a movie made, that's because we did the film credit. If you're not happy with not being able to find a place to park, that's up to the local government. They really screwed it up.
You pastor. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, well.
There are some growing pains,
There are.
He's Mayor Murphy, and we get it too. Some productions are more thoughtful than others. We had a production land a helicopter in the middle of the night without asking for permission.
Yeah,
I think they did that intentionally because it would have been hard for us to give that particular activity permission. But
although now with one of our new neighbors, helicopter flights at any time during 24 hours is pretty normal around here.
Yeah.
One of our neighbors over in Rhinebeck.
Correct. So pretty extraordinary, though. But
So we did some other things that have a local impact too in the budget. We funded several organizations that have relationships to Kingston. Bel Air, of course, or Ulster County, I should say. Bel Air was given $1.5 million. That's a little bit of a bump from previous years, but something that I have always assured happened in the budget when Bel Air moved into ORDA, the Olympic Regional Development Authority. I was concerned that it would be the orphan stepchild of the organization, and I insisted every year that a portion of ORDA resources be specifically earmarked for Bel Air, and this year we were able to do a little bit more, thankfully, with the great help of Senator Hinchy. We were able to do more. We also were able to get $150,000 for the center named in her dad's honor, the Catskill Visitor Center, Maurice D. Hinchy Catskill Visitor Center. So that's also important. We got money for the Carey Institute, which is actually over in Millbrook, but they do a study of the ecosystem of the Catskills here. They've been studying the very fragile and very unique in the world ecosystem of the Catskills. With, I think the sum and substance of it is if you go down to the ridge, the Shungum Ridge, you have the only place on Earth where there is still living remnants of both equatorial and polar influences.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a crossroads of the two parts of the globe, and it's buried deep in the crevices, and they're microbic life forms. But it's the one place on Earth where that still exists.
Those species exist side by side.
So
that does create a curious ecosystem. Obviously.
It does.
Scientists will just go crazy collecting that data.
It's informative for the rest of the world. I mean, what we learn about that is informative for the rest of the world. What Carey's doing is slightly different. Carey's doing something much more practical use for the current day. Not that that's not practical, but it doesn't have the same direct daily impact. That's stuff that Carey's doing. So that's important. The Benjamin Center. Benjamin Center named for the former director, Jerry Benjamin. He's retired now. The new director is K.T. Tobin, and my sympathies to her family for their loss.
She would...
And, there was a tragedy in her family, so we were able to continue our work we were doing with KT while she dealt with that. But we're very lucky. We got $145,000 for the Benjamin Center to...
Apologies, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying because her dedication to her new position was going to take her away from her family. I didn't realize they had suffered
there was a tragedy.
I apologize.
Yes, that's okay.
I kind of figured you misunderstood.
Yeah, but the Benjamin Center got a $145,000 grant. That grant will be used for a couple of different things, but primarily it will be used for bringing technology into the local schools. We've been doing this program for 5 years. Saugerties has always been included. We basically ask the Benjamin Center to identify with the schools and with the curriculum directors the technology that they think the students wouldn't otherwise get with the usual tech grants that exist, and maybe those things that could relate to things that are going on at the SUNY engineering department or things that are going on in industry. So that $145,000 is the administrative portion of a much larger grant. Now we're someplace between $2.5 and $3 million on that grant. ABCD, the Agribusiness Child Development Center, which provides safe and really quality daycare for the children of farm workers. that is in line for a massive infusion of cash statewide to rejuvenate their centers, many of which have not been renovated since they opened.
You know, I've never heard of that. So there are centers where daycare is provided for the farm workers?
Yeah, there are 13 of them across the state, 2 here in Ulster County, 1 in New Paltz and 1 in Kingston at Adams
I
Street.
never knew that.
Yeah, and they're really terrific. It's an unbelievable program. It provides a means, and when I say agricultural workers, that includes some people who work in restaurants and other parts of the food processing industry. They all qualify to send their kids there. And the center in Kingston is one of the newest ones, and therefore had the least need, but I've become the advocate for them. So even though very little of the money's going to Kingston Center, a lot will be going to New Paltz. We were able to get $13.5 million to renovate their centers. Now, just to put that in context, every year I usually fight to get them $1 million of operating money. And last year we tried desperately to get them $1 million or $2 million in renovation money to start this project. And we thought we had it. We actually got a letter in the mail from our budget folks saying, "Oh, you got this grant." And it turns out it was an old grant that they had mistakenly identified as being this one. I had already called ABCD, so this is kind of a bonus for what happened last year. And last but certainly not least on everybody's mind is the cost of electricity and the problems with Central Hudson. And we were able to get also a record level of funding, $1.25 million for the Public Utility Law Project, which does advocacy for ratepayers at rate hearings and takes up issues of complexity that ratepayers might not be able to deal with themselves. And right now, we are in crisis mode here in Ulster County when it comes to Ulster and Northern Dutchess County when it comes to our utility. The second highest level of calls to my office in the history of my office has been over Central Hudson issues. In a single 48-hour period, over 1,700 complaints were filed with the Public Service Commission against Central Hudson. That is also a record for them. We just published a flyer that went to the homes around our community, asking people to share their experiences, and we in turn will remove the identity of the person and we'll put it in a folder and send it up to the Public Service Commission for their consideration in the 2 of the 3 hearings that they're in the middle of conducting right now. 2 of the hearings they're conducting. I think one has to do with the changeover of their data system and all the problems that entailed. And the second one has to do with, I think it was storm recovery. We've also asked them to look into the commodity purchasing practices of Central Hudson to see if they can be as smart as Fred Costello and keep the rates down for their constituents the same way that Fred does for his when it comes to municipal power.
So the folks that are listening, you do have choices. You're not subject to the provider that Central Hudson's willing to give you. You have, in Saugerties, you have a CCA program, which has a fixed rate. You have the Ulster County program, which also comes with a fixed rate, or you could go into the energy market on your own and secure a fixed rate. So we're not entirely powerless for the purchase of our energy, but we are subject to Central Hudson for the distribution of our energy.
You know, I think I told you, I think I mentioned this on the show, and you were on the show, and I think I had mentioned to you, this was just before I left for Florida. Malden West Camp Fire District, we got a bill for $7,800, and we never have been over $1,200 in 1 month. So while I was in Florida, I got this email from Central, because obviously I reached out to our municipal rep. I get this email, your bill has been canceled. And then, just a week and a half ago, at the beginning of April, I printed the e-statement from M&T. We have our account at M&T. And sure enough, Central Hudson charged us $7,800.
And
Fortunately,
right.
we had the funds in there. So obviously, I picked the phone up immediately and called our municipal rep. So you just wonder how these things happen. That email was auto-generated.
Yes.
But I will say this. He took care of the problem. He drove to the Malden station, And what happened is we put a generator in, and they had to change the meter. Well, the old meter had a multiplier. Well, and here's the other thing I can't, they put this new meter in, but they took the readings on that and used the multiplier from the old meter.
Well,
Just wonder how this happens.
That sounds like a situation that was unique to the Malden Fire Department, but
Yes.
there are people who have done nothing except turn down the thermostat and turn lights out.
And they're still getting
they're
us-
still getting these outrageous bills. I will reveal some anonymity, which I don't usually do with constituents, but my own daughter has called me 4 days in a row. She first gets a bill for 3 times what her usual bill is, and it's automatically deducted from her savings account. And she's trying to figure out her monthly bills, and now she's concerned that Central Hudson just took out half of her rent, that she was going to have to pay. The next day, she gets another bill that says there's a correction, and that, no, she didn't know that much, but it was only $150 less, still well over what it usually is. The next day, she gets another notice that says, and I'm saying literally like the next day and 2 days later, 3 days later, the next day she said, she gets a notice, it's all a big mistake, don't worry about it. And then the next day she gets a shut-off notice. And all the time, this is all a billing error with their computers. This situation has repeated itself dozens and dozens, hundreds and hundreds of times throughout the Central Hudson service area. And they've been aware of it for now going on 4 or 5 months. And yes, they're taking corrective measures, but they're not doing it fast enough. But I also want to add this, because I'm trying to be fair here. Just like you, in your experience with the fire department, we have a customer service rep who we deal with in our district office. He hasn't helped my daughter yet. That's kind of, we're doing that on our own. We have a customer service rep in our office, and when people call us with these problems, we put them in touch with that rep. And that rep will walk through the entire process to figure out if it's a Central Hudson problem or if it's a customer problem. Another issue that's occurred, and this was also part of my daughter's problem, is there has not been a real meter reading in over 6 months. So the estimated meter readings were based upon 2020 weather as opposed to 2021 weather and 2022 weather. And 2020 going into 21 was far more mild than 21 going into 22. And so the estimates were based upon last year's usage, of course, also screwed up by the new computer system. So these are the problems that we're dealing with.
So I thought every other month they did an actual meter read.
Right. That's the law. It used to be that you got a bill every other month, and that's when the meter reading was done. But then when they went to monthly billing, every other month was supposed to be an actual reading.
See, and I still feel that Central Hudson should give their customers the option whether they want a monthly billing or a bi-monthly billing. And I've said this right from the start. It has to create more work. It has to create more expense on Central Hudson's part.
That may not be their call. That may be something that they would have to apply to the Public Service Commission and get approval for, because the monthly billing was imposed by the Public Service Commission. That wasn't a choice of Central Hudson. And the reason for it was that a comparison was done, a study was done, and it was determined that where there is monthly billing, there's far fewer defaults.
I can understand that with
But
people
I hear
that
you.
go month to month with it. So they did not have to apply to the Public Service Commission for the 1 month billing. That was a mandate back then.
Mandated, yeah.
And you think somebody in the Public Service Commission would have the brains to, say, well, we're going to give them the option if they want to give businesses, because besides the expense of Central Hudson with monthly billing, processing monthly checks, so 12 times a year as opposed to 6 times a year, there has to be more expense. To a business, there has to be more expense because time is money. To us,
I agree.
It's more expense.
I agree. Long story short is that we are in the midst of having this whole thing looked at by the Public Service Commission, and I'm hoping that we see some positive results from the Public Service Commission before Central Hudson goes and completes their current rate increase request. There's several components to your bill. One part of the bill is taxes. There's no question about that, and the taxes have been, I wouldn't say reasonable, but I would say low. They've been fair considering all things that they're used for. the delivery charges have been growing and growing and growing on the bill to the point now where most people have delivery charges that are higher than the actual cost of the commodity that they're buying. So if you're paying half your bill for gas and half your bill for electric, probably 40% of your electric bill is delivery, and 50% of your gas bill is delivery, and the commodity is just a small part of that.
Now, I could see if they're using the justification with the delivery charge because of the huge amount of expense they've had to occur from electrical power lines, overhead power lines, and transformers, et cetera, with the recent storms
Okay,
that
so
we've had.
so let's talk about that, because
But now natural gas runs underground.
right. So let's talk about the storms for a minute. The natural gas has a very expensive delivery system too. They've been replacing every single natural gas line in Kingston right now.
You're right, that's true. Yep.
It's
Yep,
right.
so
I
these
think they
two.
have to replace them all in their whole
Yep.
system. But let's talk about the storm response. We have not seen the storm response expenses on our bill yet, because that goes into the next rate filing. And
Lovely.
that's why I raised an objection. And, people are, oh, you're picking on them, you're picking on them, you're picking on the line workers, and I'm not. The rate filing that Central Hudson makes next time they seek a rate increase will include the costs, the extraordinary costs that they went to respond to the storm. Those costs will be laid out. Every penny will be laid out before the Public Service Commission, and Central Hudson will maximize their request to be reimbursed for every penny that they put out in the storm, rather than have their shareholders pay for it. The question is, did the response by Central Hudson, was that response changed at all by affirmative or passive things that Central Hudson did that caused the cost to go up? So let me give you a couple of examples. If Central Hudson changes their call centers and no longer has local call centers, and people who are answering the phone are not familiar with the communities, and it takes longer for a truck to get to a location. By the time the truck gets there, there's a multiple of what the problem was to begin with, and maybe they were able to stop it in the beginning if they had somebody who knew the communities that they were serving. If they hire contractors to cut down trees instead of using their own employees to cut down trees, and those folks don't do as good a job, and they're not following the same protocols. If Central Hudson's response to a bad tree job is not to hire that contractor again, instead of to train that employee to do it right, and they did it all in the name of saving money, that was for the shareholders. That wasn't for us. If Central Hudson waits to call for mutual aid because they have to pay for mutual aid, waits till the very last minute, and the result is that some of the mutual aid is already used elsewhere, and therefore they have to pay more for mutual aid, and if they did that also to cut their costs to help their shareholders, they shouldn't be able to recover that from the ratepayers. If they did it for the shareholders ought to pay. If it was a true, genuine cost of the emergency that was unavoidable, and that Central Hudson belt and suspended ahead of time, then sure, then let's all pay for what was done for our purposes. But that's the very issue that will go before the Public Service Commission, one of the many issues that will go before the Public Service Commission next time the Central Hudson is there for a rate increase, and we've already started to participate in that discussion. And that's one of the reasons why the money for pulp is so important, the Public Utility Law Project, because it's very complex, and the complexities go beyond the ability of any normal consumer, any one of us, any layperson, to really understand. Where pulp does this in and out. They do it with every utility in the state, and they do it successfully. So
It is its own science to understand that on its own. It's intentionally, it's complex. Do we know, are the experiences we're having with Central Hudson and utility in our area similar to what's happening in other areas, or other areas run by National Grid or Con Ed not having these issues?
different issues in different places. Everybody is experiencing the rise in fuel prices because that's a worldwide phenomenon that has nothing whatsoever to do with our local utilities, except that if they do careful purchasing practices, they can mitigate it a little bit, and that's what we're trying to find out too. But when it comes to the system change that is unique to Central Hudson, when it came to the ice storm, it was remarkably unique that it was focused on the upper half of Ulster County. And
As we know.
as we know,
Yeah. Very well.
So the questions there are, where is nature responsible and where is the utility responsible? Where did the utility take the appropriate steps, and where, no matter what you have done, the calamity would have occurred? When it comes to the infrastructure, changing the way we approach the infrastructure. Central Hudson has both transmission and distribution lines. Transmission are the long lines, distribution lines are what exist within our communities. And there's a tremendous line loss on those lines. We're losing almost 20% of the power, a little bit over 15% of the power on those lines. That's not the worldwide average. In England, they lose less than 5%. And that's through better insulation of the lines, better quality of the lines, and in some cases, where the lines are inaccessible, using advanced technology to make sure that those lines don't have line loss, because you can't get to them, so you have to make them more fortified. In the United States, here in New York, the Public Service Commission builds that wasted power into your and my rate. In England, they're not allowed to do that. So there's a lot of
Incentive to mitigate loss, where here you get paid
Exactly.
for loss, it doesn't really matter.
That's right, exactly. And if you start to amortize the cost of doing all those repairs, they say, oh, that won't pay for itself in a reasonable period of time, so we're not going to do it. And they just eat the loss. So we're wasting electricity. We're wasting so much electricity in New York State that we could replace 1 or 2 whole power plants with the money that we waste, that we're
See,
not
now,
even using.
that is, I just think, so ridiculous. And I've harped on this for I don't know how many years, where there's occurrences, time after time after time, the high target areas where power lines come down, let's start putting those areas underground.
Well, they do that. They do that to some extent, where it is feasible and cost effective. The bigger place, Greg, where power is lost is where it changes. You go to a power station, you go to a transformer, you go to a linkage between a transmission line and a distribution system. You go in an old neighborhood where the lines haven't been replaced, and it's short circuits, it's bad connections, it's rusty connections, or not rusty, but whatever. Corroded. Thank you. Corroded connections. It's that sort of thing. It's on the big power lines that aren't fully insulated. The way some of the lines in England are super insulated. They're insulated with a liquid, where there's a lot of power going through very fast and full time, and where security matters. So yeah, we have to pay more attention to the grid. Lately, there's been a lot of discussion about taking our private sector out of the loop. I don't think that's appropriate. I think the private sector has a role, but that doesn't mean the public sector doesn't have an opportunity for a bigger role. We should be looking at those places where the private sector won't invest and find out why, and either force them to invest by regulation, which we can, or to invest ourselves and become the proprietors of the system. We know that in Saugerties, where the electricity is being purchased by the municipality, that much more care went into the purchase of that electricity. We know that in places like Messina, where where the utility is owned by the municipality in its entirety, that it's maintained in a very different way, and that's true across the state, and it's true across the country.
We're at the bottom of the hour. Time for a break. We'll be back in a few.
You're listening to Kingston Community Radio on WGHQ Kingston. On your radio at 920 AM and 92.5 FM, and also online at mykcr.org.
Around any bend in any road, any time of the day or night, Central Hudson crews can be found working in the Hudson Valley. From Montgomery to Millerton, Freehold to Fishkill, and many points in between. We mark our work zones for safety's sake. As a driver, you can do your part too. Slow down, pay attention, put down the phone, and obey the flaggers. Be prepared to stop and maintain a safe distance from the vehicle in front of you. Safety matters.
Long ago, you wouldn't think of galloping on a horse while doing calligraphy, and you wouldn't have attempted to ride your bike while typing a letter. Yet you think you can safely operate a multi-ton vehicle while texting? Behind the wheel is no place to multitask. If you want to BRB, drive now and text later. Lives depend on it.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org, a message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, Noise, and the Ad Council.
Introducing the YMCA. Sure, you know the Y for a swim or a game of hoops, but we're more than that. We're a cause. When you take a jump shot at the Y, someone else is getting job training. Practice yoga as a team practices her leadership skills. We give people of all ages, incomes, and backgrounds a chance to learn, grow, and thrive. So while you might think of the Y as the place for lifting weights, we're also about lifting entire communities. That's the Y. We're so much more. Visit ymca.net/more.
We all come together and stand together to serve our veterans. We invest in the latest technology.
We take the time to train the next generation of doctors and nurses. We work together to make sure we heal their bodies and their minds.
This is our mission. More than 300,000 of us working as one, together with families and loved ones. No matter where they live in this country, we'll be there.
We stand strong, united. Stand with us in caring for our veterans.
Hi, this is Winnie from the Rosendale Seniors, and I support Kingston Community Radio, and so should you.
This portion of Kingston Community Radio is brought to you by Ulster Savings Bank. Visit their newest branch, conveniently located at the Ulster Commons Plaza in Lake Katrine. Experience the difference that local community banking offers with the convenience of another great location, easy access, plenty of parking, and a 24-hour ATM. Ulster Savings Bank, invested in community, invested in you. Member FDIC.
Do you guys have a dog?
Thank you, Lawrence Maxwell. And welcome back, viewers and listeners who have been with us this morning, and those just joining us for our last half hour already. Morning flew by again. 331-9255 is our call-in number. We'd love to hear from you. State Assemblyman Kevin Cahill is with us this morning, as is Town Supervisor Fred Costello.
Good morning.
So let me turn the tables on you here. I know
Turn the tables.
You always ask me questions. I have some. What's that?
We're all out of power.
No.
It's a pun.
Generally, you get to ask me questions, and I then go on for a half hour. So I'm going to give you the same opportunity. Talk to us about what the after effects is of the transition with HITS. Will Saugerties see any changes there? Do we anticipate it being the same as it was, or?
Time will tell on that, but I think the first expectation is exactly what they put forward, is that Tom has done an amazing job inventing that business and stewarding that business and bringing it to Ulster County and Saugerties. And he has been challenged by COVID as well. And, he's reached a point in his career where maybe he's taking a step back, but that's not entirely clear. However, this partnership brings capital that was out of reach before. So the marketplace for horse jumping has become more competitive. The expectation of the participants for the venues to feel and look and work a certain way has elevated, and we anticipate that there's going to be a significant capital infusion into all of the HITS facilities on the East Coast, including Saugerties.
So you would say that HITS is still here to stay?
I agree, it's here to stay. Yeah.
And that this is going to be a good thing for the community in the sense that it will help grow HITS. What will be different is the very personal touch that Tom Struzari has had, and I witnessed it firsthand here with Family of Woodstock and the relationship that he had with them, and how much he did to stabilize their private sector financing when the public sector financing was very unpredictable.
Yeah, Tom has a lot of those where he's quietly made an impactful difference and didn't really draw a lot of spotlight to himself for doing so, but he's done that on a number of occasions. He restored the sports program at the school in a year when the budget was tight and they were having difficulty getting a budget passed, and he basically didn't acknowledge it and still does not, but funded the sports program for the
Which
school.
he didn't want anybody to know about.
Yeah, so we're doing a good job keeping that secret here on the air. But I think that's a valid point, because he is the resident owner here, and this new group is remote, so to speak. They may not have that same subliminal relationship with the community that we've enjoyed with Tom being the resident owner entirely. And but that remains to be seen. For now, I'm very optimistic that this will be the resource that HITS represents will live on and will be the beneficiary of a new capital infusion. And the folks that have been coming here for a number of years are excited, and we're looking forward to them coming back and still enjoying that facility the way we all have.
So one of the things that we witnessed, on a regular basis is when we have these attractions, they are exactly that. They are attractions. And I always go back to the biennial sculpture show when that first began in Kingston, and people would come to the sculpture show. They would hear about it because it was kind of unique in the Northeast. People would come to it, and many people came here, and that's how they discovered this area, and then they came back or they stayed.
Yeah.
And the same is true of HITS. Many people came here, especially people of significant means, came to this community because of HITS, and they ended up, you know what?
Yeah.
Now their favorite restaurant is around here, and I hope that we continue with that practice. That's been part of what has enriched us as a community. Not just people of means, but it has attracted a whole a stripe across society of people that have come here because of HITS, and it's been important not just to Saugerties but to the whole northern part of Ulster and northern Dutchess County. If you travel as I do around northern Dutchess County, one of the things that you realize is we are in horse country. People don't realize that.
Let me give you my first take. If the indication that I see going on the HITS grounds this early, and you talked about some capital improvements, there's a beehive of activity, and normally that doesn't start till right around the beginning of March, because the first horse shows are not until the end of May. Yeah. But like this morning coming down, it was still dark, and even Thursday or Friday last week, all the barns that you access through Gate A, which is off of Mike Route Road, were all lit. Now, whether they forget to turn the lights off or there's, activity that early, I don't know. But all the gates are unlocked. The temporary fences that block the entrances are down. And this is the earliest that I've seen it since HITS has been in operation. So I don't know what they're up to. It's really none of my business, but it's going to be interesting to see.
I remember in the early years of HITS and Saugerties, I remember it in Ellenville too, as Elliot Auerbach was discussing earlier, but I remember the early days of HITS and Saugerties, and it was disruptive. And it seems that you've all developed a rhythm now, that the wave of people coming in, when they're coming in, everybody's sort of adapted to it, and it's become part of the fabric of the community now, and that's an important thing too.
I think that's an important point. There is an expectation amongst certainly the hospitality industry that supports it, that as they ramp up their season, the activity associated with those businesses goes up, and the short-term rental community, the restaurant community, pretty much all the village businesses, they all kind of come to rely on that 8 weeks of season, and the influx of activity that comes along with it. It's complemented by many other things, obviously, car show, garlic festival, and many other things. But those 8 weeks of HITS matter, and so do the rental shows that come in. So it's a big deal, and there still are some growing pains. We definitely grew into it. But there's a lot of folks that still may not like the traffic activity, or may not like the congestion it may cause around the Cantine complex. But there's nothing perfect ever.
A lot of those people are ones who moved here because of it, and they're like, "Wait a second."
We didn't know other people were coming too. So, but it's been nothing but a positive for Saugerties. And I think HITS' decision to locate in Saugerties is kind of one of those markers that you can look back upon, because when they did that, it was kind of outside of our thinking and our experience, but it really memorialized that we had become a destination, and a summer destination and attraction, and all these other spin-off activities can happen because of that.
See, now I would differ with you on the point of what you became. I think you always were. I think you were undiscovered in that regard. But, when you go to your main streets, you go to your crossroads there in the village, Yeah, there's some new boutique-y type stores there, but a lot of those stores have been there for a very long time, and they're long-time merchants, and you were one of the communities that was successful in keeping a Main Street, and that didn't exist everywhere. You can park your car and walk around the village and have an experience. You see Mr. Drucker over there, and you see the doctor with his little black bag, and it's like hometown, little small town America when you walk through. You pop into the hardware store, and
Smith's Hardware is a good example of that.
Yeah.
What, 4 generations now with Jake?
Listen, we could go down the list. You go to the corner, it's Sorgety's Furniture Mart, and just
Exchange Hotel.
Yep. So I think that the sense that people have when they get here of, look what we built. No, it's look what you discovered. It existed.
That's fair.
That's
fair. It's true.
And it's a really fantastic place, and I feel the same way about this town too. Where I live, so many people come here now, and I'm at a restaurant. I used to know every single person at every single table. Now I'm lucky if I know a third of them, and they're new. They're new to the community, and to some extent more so in Kingston than in Sorgety's. The character of the community changed to accommodate the new population. It became a little bit more, couple of the little funky restaurants and things like that, and it was not quite stable. And we saw that in the past couple of years with the closure of about a half a dozen restaurants in Kingston just in the last 6 or 7 months. But it has been invigorating and also a good reminder of what a great place we live. And sometimes we forget that.
I alluded to in the first, second half hour when Elliot was on, with what you were saying going into a restaurant. 15, 20 years ago, I'd walk down Main and Partition Street, know 80% of the people, 20% I wouldn't know. Now, I walk down Main and Partition Street, I know less than 20% of the people, and the people I don't know is more than 80%.
It's true.
I won't go there and just talk about how old I am, but I do remember Sorgety's from my youth. I remember it from when I represented it in the past, and I know it from the times I've been there in recent times, and it still has that same great, like, the small town feel that people long for. And you can feel a similar, although to a somewhat lesser degree, sensation when you walk through Catskill, when you walk through Hudson, when you walk through Rhinebeck, when you walk through Red Hook. These river towns have a really unique characteristic to them, and they're more intense than they have a right to be.
There's a swagger about them.
Right, there's more to them. There's more to them than the size of the population would seem to demand. But that's kind of the way it used to be everywhere. So.
That's a fair point. You're making me think back to Mayor Yerrick, at a time when
Mayor Yerrick,
such a character, but at a time when downtowns weren't the significance are. We were all shopping at the mall and we were all doing these other things. He had this alternative vision. He was investing in the village and making sure that the village did remain and did acknowledge its strengths. And you got to, back then he looked a little crazy, but he looks a lot like a prophet now.
I just remember working with Bob Yerrick so much, and it was such a joy because we were not of the same political party, and that was left at the door. That mattered not one iota. And I always, whenever I talk to particularly towns with villages, I always tell them that if the mayor and the supervisor get along, we can all get along. If the mayor and the supervisor don't get along, not much is going to happen.
No.
So I have several towns like that. Rhinebeck has a village, New Paltz has a village, Red Hook has 2 villages, and it's a very important part to see the working together of the town and the village. When it doesn't happen, it's almost as if there's a block to any progress.
Yeah. Living and experiencing that in the way I have, Mayor Murphy and I went to school together. We've been friends since we were young. And so we've enjoyed a great synergy, and we've been able to collaborate and work together and certainly reach plateaus that would not be possible without that collaboration. But there's a tension between the two organizations. We rely on the village for our primary water supply. So that, fundamental, you're married at some capacity, so you have to find a way to get along. But there are other areas where there is tension. When we engage in some zoning activities, they kind of look at it side eye. Is that creating a competitive situation with some of our commercial interests? And there's other areas where there's tension as well. When we merged the police departments, there was a great fear that the village would be underserved by the new police department. But
I remember worrying that there would be no Terry Mayone.
yeah. So,
right?
But that's a fair point, because there was that personal level. You had a small department where everybody knew who everyone was,
right.
And you expected to see Terry or Chief Kimball or whoever on the
Just walking on the street.
Yeah, and I think largely we've been able to protect that culture and that activity, but it's a little bit different.
Right.
The entire community, and not having that central advocacy, but the cost of that became unsustainable.
So Saugerties is a unique community, even among the communities that I represent that have a town and a village. I used to represent Napanock. I'm sorry,
Warsing?
Thank you, Warsing and Ellenville, and there's a distinction between the town and the village in Warsing and Ellenville. The Ellenville exists, and everything else exists around Ellenville. And yes, and very much like Saugerties, nobody lives in the town of Warsing. Everybody lives in Greenwood Lake or Ellenville or some other community, and it's the same in Saugerties. Nobody lives in Saugerties. They might live in West Saugerties, but chances are they live in Malden, or they live in Berkeley Heights, or they live in Mount Marion, or they live in Glasgow, or they live in the Village, or West Camp. They live in these communities within Saugerties, where that's how they identify. That's not true in every place else. In Rhinebeck, it's largely the village and outside the village. In Red Hook, it's the villages and outside the villages. In New Paltz, it's the village and outside the village. There is no external community identity outside the main village area. And the consequence of that is that the villages become even more the centerpiece, but somehow or another, even with that unique neighborhood or parochial identification that people experience in Saugerties, the village is still the center of activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's really critically important. And I think part of it is that there was never any artificial barrier put up to prevent investment in the infrastructure of the village. You kept the parks there. You kept when the Boys and Girls Club opened, and they didn't say, "Oh, wait, there's much more land out in such and such a place. Let's do it there." You put it there. The village and a lot of the other offices exist, and that's also very important.
Even the town offices. That was
offices.
Yep, that was a big. When there was an effort to relocate the town offices, they historically had been in the village, and there was a huge acknowledgement that it should remain in the village, and that debate surrounded the renovation at the library as well. There was a clear consensus that overwhelmingly folks felt that the library should remain within the boundaries of the village because it's central. Even if it's not geographically central, it's central to the road infrastructure. It's easy to access, and it kind of having all those resources near kind of elevate each resource in a special way.
So going back again, just a few years ago, not that many, the towns of Rosendale, Marbletown, and Rochester were seeking to combine their municipal services, their municipal headquarters, and they were going to do it at the old Rosendale Elementary School on 213, which was kind of on the border of the three towns. Rochester walked away from it for a variety of reasons. Mostly, I think it was because the judge didn't want to drive. But the other two towns combined. And what they did was take two towns that didn't really have that seriously concentrated center. Yes, Rosendale has Main Street in the old village, and Marbletown has 209, the corridor there, but they didn't have that sense of community. And now when you go to the municipal center on 213, you get that sense. Certainly the development isn't all around there. But having it in the place where people can walk is very important. Whenever we've considered moving our district office, we've only considered places that would still be walkable to a significant number of people on the bus line nearby. because we thought it was important that people gain services. I remember a few years ago when the discussion was had about whether the family court should move from this very building to where it is today. And I understand the inadequacy of this facility for that purpose, and I'm certainly glad it's been repurposed to something that's really a benefit to the community. But I was concerned about moving part of the legal system away from the rest of the legal system because it loses its focus. And once you lose your focus, who knows what comes next, you know?
Absolutely. There's a synergy that's not necessarily tangible, but we all know is there. And I admire in a way what Marbletown and Rosendale did. That facility, we've gone there. Ulster County Transportation Safety Council meets there. There's been so many.
Have you been to the cafe?
It's great.
It's fantastic.
It's great. And that wouldn't be possible without the union of those two governing bodies under one roof. And I think they did about as good a job as you can. Each community retained their identity. There's a common area in the middle, and who doesn't want a gymnasium when you need to blow off a little bit of steam?
Right. I will confess that I was a little saddened by it because it made permanent something that I fought heartily about 45 years ago. When I was just a kid, I got involved with a group of people in the former village of Rosendale to keep the village. And there was a movement at the time to dissolve the village. And I didn't live there, but I cared greatly about it. I had known about it since I was an even younger teenager. And I got involved to preserve the village. And it was on the ballot, are we going to dissolve the village? And we fought as hard as we could to keep it from happening, but then it dissolved. I will say that they killed the government, but they didn't kill the village. The village remains. If you go down Main Street in Rosendale, you still got the feeling that it's a place. But I felt that when the government moved to the municipal center, that kind of was the last nail in the coffin of the structure of government in the village of Rosendale.
It's a curious thought, though. The identity never did expire. It's still there.
That's right.
And and to agree, it's probably moved to the library.
Yeah, the library, the theater,
Downtown.
Yeah. I mean, it's defined on one side by the 1850 house and the library on the other side, and that Main Street, and then St. Peter's up on the hill.
Which is a pretty amazing structure in itself.
Which, St. Peter's?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's
pretty spectacular.
Yeah. But it was, they had not been able to kick the spirit out of the village. They could kick the village out of the government, but they couldn't kick the spirit out of the village. And I think about it, that was a place that had many, many similarities to Saugerties in that, for the want of a better term, the hippies and the rednecks sat next to each other at the bar. And that was the way it was. And they were fine with that. Maybe outsiders looked at them like, what the heck is going on here? But there was an understanding and there was a commonality that existed between the two populations in the community and both of them were focused on enjoying what the community was, not looking to change it into something else.
Yeah. And they had, these iconic local figures. Dietrich Werner's coming to mind. He celebrated the Century Concrete legacy in a way that no one else could.
Well, Dietrich was central in our efforts to save the village because going back then, Dietrich owned one of the buildings on Main Street, a couple doors down from the theater, and he had 2 telephones, which in those days was a phone bank. And we did a lot of calling from his places, and Dietrich was very much a part of it. Willie Gouldy was very much a part of it. So many other people. You go on the other side, and you go to the guys. I'm blanking on some of their names right now, but Ritters and people like that who were part of the fabric of the village. Many people who could have traced their heritage back to when the village was formed over being part of the D&H Canal system and the extraction of limestone to create America. They actually created America. The foundation to the Statue of Liberty is from the caves in Rosendale. The piers that put the bridge that Flagler built from the edge of Florida out to Key West came from Rosendale. Yeah, and in turn, Flagler built a little low gauge railroad, the small gauge railroad that Snyder had up there. It was a swap.
I didn't realize that stone was harvested from here.
The mortar in the Washington Monument came from Rosendale. I mean, there's so many things around this country that can trace themselves back to there, but even more important was that a community emerged from there, and it was a working class community with people that had a great deal of community pride and a great sense of family. And Rosendale used to have pub after pub after pub, but they were pubs where Dad could take the kids, and the kids could sit in the corner and color or play pinball or whatever it was. They weren't places where, you went out, maybe you also went out on a date too, but they were just places where families would gather, the kind of things maybe we relate more to Ireland. But that became part of it because of the working class culture there. But every part of Ulster County has a story to tell like that. I've been thinking a lot about Hits and how transformative it was to the village to get and to Saugerties to give it this second lease on the life it already had and to bring emphasis to things that already existed. And I was hoping that you would give the answer you gave, which is that it portends good things for the future.
I believe it does. Yeah. But it's a curious thing. It's fun to talk to some of the old timers that are still around to talk to about it, but the dozens and dozens of bars that existed in Saugerties, and they all kind of catered to a blue-collar working environment surrounding the Cantine Mill where Diamond Mills is today. There was a lot of bars.
People say, "Oh, but it's the DWI laws that closed the bars." Well, people used to walk to those bars. Right. I used to see guys stumbling home from the pub after,
But existence was different.
One of our former village police chiefs every day.
The geographic area that you occupied on a daily basis was significantly smaller. You worked at the plant that you walked to. You went to the local pub, 2 or 3 that you met your friends at.
Right.
You ate at home. You gardened in your backyard. It was a rare occasion where you were going off to Kingston or off to someplace else.
Right.
So
I think a movie that depicts that and also the lodge life very well is Deer Hunter. Deer Hunter is a 1970s snapshot of the local pub culture that existed at the time and the local lodge culture that existed at the time, and it wasn't all glorious and wonderful, but it was a time that we look back on. Now we're very fortunate in that you can go to most of our places and find really, really good food. You can find a variety of things to buy, or oftentimes we've developed ourselves as an arts center, and now. Now you're little Hollywood up there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We are out of time. Kevin Cahill, thank you very much for joining us, as you do twice a month. Always look forward to having you.
My staff is going to be disappointed that I didn't get through 3/4 of their list.
Well, there was more important stuff. More important stuff.
Well, we can reconvene in 2 weeks. How's that?
There you go.
There you go.
Fred Costello, Supervisor, Town of Saugerties. Thank you. Lawrence Maxwell. Thank you. Most importantly of all, listeners and viewers. Thank you. We'll be back here, same time, same place, next week.
Is George okay?